Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome, welcome. Great. We have a number of people online, but it is so good to be back together. And we encourage and hope we will continue to kind of get back together as a big part of all of our missions, and especially here at JV, is really building that kind of community and navigating these journeys together. So we are so glad that you are here in person and online. Those of you online during the question and answer portion, if you would just type in your Q&A, we are going to be monitoring the questions and answer portion. And also anyone here will get a copy of the slides after this, as well as a survey will be sent out so that you can give us some feedback on what we nailed and what we could do better. So we really created this series with Dr. Burke and Hickman and Louder and Mary Jo O'Neill and Julie Billiart schools, because we were listening to our parents specifically talk about some of the areas that we all could use support in as we're kind of going through these waters together. So this was really, we listened to you and we're trying to implement this. But again, please give us feedback or other topics that you would like addressed. We took it from the school side, and then Dr. Burke more as the community side and kind of real world application of some of this stuff. And then obviously how this kind of plays into the IEP process through Mary Jo O'Neill. So our speakers tonight, we have Miss Alyssa Snyder, who is our speech language pathologist at our Westlake campus. We are so glad we scooped her up right out of grad school. So she has been with us for 2 years at our Westlake campus. We have Dr. Jay Burke, who I like to say he really started social skills here at JB. Prior to my time, he was here doing social skills in groups and pull out here at JB school. And Mary Jo O'Neill, who has had also quite a journey with JB, an alumni, a teacher here, as well as helped start the Notre Dame Academic Support Center, and then is now in the kind of special ed parent advocate seat. So we are so lucky we have all of them. So tonight, we're going to show you and talk with you guys about social skills in the classroom. Then we're going to talk about the development of those social skills outside of the classroom, which is always so critical for our kids. And then what does social skills development look like on an IEP? And then we kind of have an Ask the Experts led by Mrs. Jody Johnston, who is also an expert, our Director of Academics and Teacher Development. Okay, so without further ado, I will pass it over to Alyssa.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, so I am Alyssa Snyder. I'm the speech language pathologist at Julie Billiart Westlake. I'm here to talk to you guys a little bit about what we do at school, some of the language we use, the curriculums we use, so that way you guys are able to start incorporating it into your house. Maybe it becomes, you know, as easy as working on homework with your kid. Although I say that with a grain of salt, because I know for some of you, maybe homework isn't so fun and easy, but it could be as reoccurring as doing homework. We could start working on it, you know, every day. So to start, I want to explain some of the curriculums we use. The first curriculum is called the We Thinkers. This is a curriculum that teaches our kids to be problem solvers in different social situations. So it gives us concrete language to kind of make learning these like abstract concepts fun and easy for our kids to learn. I'm sure if you're a parent of a JV student, you've seen all of these concepts, especially expected and unexpected behavior. This is a big one that we teach, and it teaches our kids that in a range of experiences, social instances, there's a variety of appropriate and inappropriate behaviors that, you know, they can partake in. So an expected behavior would be like in the classroom, for example, sitting and listening to your teacher. You know, it makes people feel comfortable and happy and calm around you. And then an unexpected behavior would be like maybe walking around the classroom when your teacher's talking, or swinging on the swing on your stomach, it's not really appropriate for school. It might make others have some like weird or wacky, uncomfortable thoughts around you. But we like using expected and unexpected because it kind of deters away from that like good and bad language. Like an unexpected behavior could even be, like wishing someone a happy Easter on Christmas. Like someone's gonna think you're maybe a little crazy if you're thinking it's Easter time on Christmas. So that could be an unexpected behavior as well. We have flexible thinking. So this is more for our kids who are rigid, they're stuck in their ways, they sit in the same seat every day at lunch. So reminding them to be a flexible thinker, like reminding them it's not going to be the end of the world if someone takes your lunch spot, taking a calming deep breath. Let's be flexible. Maybe, you have to run to the grocery store before picking them up from school, you don't have time, but you know that your kid is very routine based. Maybe they're gonna, have a meltdown if you have to stop at the grocery store after picking them up. So using that, let's be flexible, we can do this, it's gonna be great. And then like moving into that size of the problem, big problem versus little problem. A big problem is gonna be something that affects a lot of people. You're gonna be maybe scared, you might be frightened, someone's gonna be in danger. That's gonna be a big problem. And then we have little problems. So that could be like, maybe you're feeling a little frustrated, you're annoyed, it's really only affecting you. You have the tools and the strategies to kind of calm down, and going off of that, then we go into like sides of the reaction. So obviously if it's a big problem, you're going to have like a big reaction. You're going to need to get an adult's help. But if it's going to be a little problem, like maybe someone takes your favorite swing at recess, or, you don't get to be the red guy in Candyland, having like a small reaction, taking a deep breath, like it's okay, little problem. Our next one is body and brain in the group. So this is like a concept that we teach our kids, that we like are able to show them, or while working in a group, that, if we have our body and brain in the group, we're following the group plan. Maybe the group plan is to go, if we go to the zoo, like with our cousins or something, body and brain in the group, we're going as a group, we're working as a group, like when we're in school. Just like reminding them that while we're in a group setting, we're all thinking about the same thing, we're looking all together and just following a big group plan, which is also down here as well. We have whole body listening. A lot of times our kids might be listening with their ears, but maybe their bodies are fidgeting or they're looking around. So this is teaching our kids, like, let's maybe listen with our hands, and then they calm their hands and their lap, or show us that you're listening with your feet, and they like calm their feet down. And this shows our communication partner that we're listening to what they're saying, and we're really taking in that everything that they're telling us. And then the last thing would be a first then board. So a lot of times if we see our kids maybe getting a little bit heightened, like going back to, you have to stop by the grocery store before you go home when you pick them up from school, using that language, like first grocery store, then home, it gives them like a concrete example of what they need to do first before they get ultimately like what they want. The next curriculum we use is the zones of regulation. And this is a framework that teaches our kids to categorize the different emotions and states that they might be feeling into colors. And it, improves their ability to recognize what they're feeling, and being able to then communicate how they're feeling, and coming up with different solutions, and using those tools to ultimately like re-regulate their body. So we have 4 different zones. We have the blue zone, which is like a low state of alertness. You're feeling a little tired, you're bored, you're feeling slow and sluggish. We have the green zone, which is a regulated state of alertness. You're happy, you're calm, you're ready to learn. A lot of our kids will say, I'm in the green zone, I'm focused, I'm ready to learn. We have the yellow zone. This is where you start to maybe lose a little bit control of your body. You're having some heightened states maybe you're stressed, or you're feeling a little silly, you're feeling confused or nervous. And then last, we have the red zone. So this is an extremely heightened state of alertness. You're having very intense feelings. Maybe you're really mad, you're out of control of your body, you're starting to have those explosive behaviors. But it's important to note that we teach our kids, you know, the yellow and red zones, those aren't the bad zones. They're not like naughty by any means. But in one way or another, we all experience the different zones. You know, but we teach them the appropriate behaviors that they can have in each zone and different tools and strategies they can use, you know, when they're in those like more heightened states to get back into the green zone. So, you know, for example, you might be in the blue zone before you're going to bed. Maybe you're reading a book, you're winding down. You would be in the blue zone. Or, you know, some parents might be in the yellow zone. They're feeling pretty frustrated if their kid comes to them at like 9:30, telling them that they have a book report due the next day. You know, mom and dad, they might be in the yellow zone. But that's a good way to like model that language then, like, oh, I'm feeling pretty frustrated. I'm in the yellow zone right now, but I'll take a deep breath. I know what I can do. I can go take a sip of water. And then like modeling those tools and strategies to get back into the green zone and being able to re-regulate. So that way, if they see that you're using that language at home and using those calming strategies, they're more likely then to start using those. And a lot of times it's great to be using this language in these curriculums because our kids are those ones that, you know, are missing those social cues. So an important thing to teach our kids are those appropriate communication skills, and going into appropriate communication skills would be like understanding those nonverbal communication signs. Our kids know everything about like such niche topics. Like they could tell you everything about a map or outer space or trains. And, you know, maybe sometimes you've seen your kid at a birthday party or even at like Thanksgiving dinner, maybe talking to their cousins, going on and on about trains. And maybe you see, you know, the person they're talking to kind of like rolling their eyes, they're turning away. So like coaching your kid to pick up on those nonverbal communication signs. Like, you know, when you're talking about trains, what are they making comments like, oh yeah, that's so cool? Is their body facing you? Or are they kind of like looking away? Are they rolling their eyes? Are they making comments like, yeah, sure. So teaching your kids to pick up on those signs, and also like going back to that language, being okay and flexible about maybe talking about a non-preferred topic, you know. And another way to model that could be like, how do you feel when dad goes on and on about his fantasy football team? Like, you know, it's kind of annoying sometimes when he doesn't stop talking about that. Like, how do we feel? We want him to stop. So making them like aware that others might not always want to talk about trains and maps, and there is a designated time to have those conversations, and just like coaching them on other things to talk about with friends. And like I said, being okay with talking about different things and understanding when there's a communication breakdown and how we can, you know, change the subject and stuff like that. And I also wanted to add that could be a good thing for our kids who have like articulation errors too, especially the older they get. Like people might not be as comfortable telling them, like, I don't understand what you're saying. So if you're able to teach your kid like what signs to kind of look for in a communication partner when there is that breakdown, to maybe like take a deep breath, let's see if we can come up with a different way to word something, and like being okay with, you know, maybe someone doesn't understand you, so let's be flexible. It's a little problem, we'll figure this out together. And so missing these social cues, going back to like they're talking to their cousin over and over again about trains, like they might not understand that their cousin is getting annoyed. They don't really know how to take perspective on how their actions are affecting other people. So a thing that we can do is teach our kids how to take perspective. And a thing I love to do in school is I'll go straight to the teachers before I plan a social skills lesson, and I'll ask them, like, what are some reoccurring behaviors or things that you see that your class is specifically struggling with. You know, a lot of time in the younger grades, it's like people are copying each other and other people are getting mad, or, you know, they're tattling, they're pushing past each other in line and getting upset about that. So I'll make a whole lesson on like being a good friend versus a bad friend. And I'll use explicit instances that happen in the classroom or out at recess. And I'll turn it into like a sorting activity. And, you know, everyone will get a turn, but I'll like make sure I call on those kids who are kind of struggling with maybe tattling or copying and pushing past in line. And we'll come up and we'll sort, like, does a good friend push past their friends in line? No. Does a good friend share their supplies with you? No, or yes. And you know, I'll use like open-ended questions. So like that kid will come up and I'll say, like, does a good friend or like a not so good friend copy? And they'll be like, well, I'm not so good friend. And well, how do you think that makes people feel like when you copy them? Or but not exactly calling them out, but being like, how would you feel if someone was copying you? And do you think, you know, people might want to be friends with someone that keeps copying them? And then I'll go into like, well, what can we do when someone copies you? How can we ask them to stop? I might even bring another kid up and maybe we'll role play, like telling someone to stop copying them, ignoring distractions, and just like really giving them the framework, like using these open-ended questions and like acting gives the kids, you know, the framework and the footsteps to start becoming that problem solver. Because if you're, you know, constantly like prompting your kid and telling them what to say and what to do in social situations, they'll become almost like dependent on your prompt and your cue to be successful during playtime. In a way that you guys can, you know, maybe start making these little social lessons like during dinner time or before bed. Like, I encourage you to reach out to your teachers, reach out to the speech therapist, or even like if you're getting those behavior reports sent home, use those behavior reports and do a sorting activity, ask those open-ended questions, you know, like, or even I'm sure like going back to Thanksgiving, if you have like a big family and you see those like social and those breakdowns happening, like, and asking those questions, like, how do you think people feel when, or how would you feel if someone was like screaming in the hallway? Do you think people are going to want to be around someone that's always screaming in the hallway? What can we do to help that friend? Or what do you think that person should do instead of screaming? Yeah, ask a teacher for help. Or, you know, our teachers spend so much time on those behavior write-ups. I'm sure you can come up with very fun things without directly, you know, calling out what it is. And so going back to what I said before, you know, by asking open-ended questions and making lessons, it is setting up our kids to become those problem solvers and not being so dependent, because a lot of them can be successful in play, but only when there is an adult facilitating it. So my last topic I want to talk about is prompting. We have a beautiful prompting hierarchy over here. I would say for social skills and like social interactions, we might start around like the modeling and gestural, verbal, maybe even visual. So going back, modeling could be like modeling when you're in those different zones, starting to use that language maybe when you're feeling upset, and then modeling those strategies, taking a deep breath. I'm going to go for a walk. I know this helps me calm down. Or even modeling those like conversations. So like with your husband or like a friend, you know, if they're going on and on about a certain topic, like showing a communication breakdown to your child and being like, hey, do you mind talking about something else? And then, you know, showing the other communication partner being flexible and working through that. Gestural could be like, you know, you're gesturing to the outcome that you want. So like maybe you see your kid starting to get a little heightened, you put out a glass of water and you're gesturing to the water, you know, go take a sip of water, let's calm down. Verbal prompts, I use verbal prompts a lot, but a way I like to use them is I don't like to explicitly give the child the answer all the time. So, you know, if someone's complimenting them and saying like, oh, I like your shirt, a good way to prompt it back verbally would be like, oh, you know, Timmy said he likes your shirt. What could you say back to that? Rather than being like, oh, he likes your shirt, say thank you. You know, because you're setting up them to develop that language and start coming up with it on their own. Or Timmy just won the game. Like when someone wins a game, what do we say? Yeah, we say good game, good job, like things like that. And then visual prompt, that's just like showing a visual of something. So, you know, you can get different colored papers for the zones, for example. Maybe you hang them up in their room or they're already available, you know, whenever you might need them, and just showing them that visual, maybe when they're being a little too silly or they're getting tired, maybe they're starting to get a little escalated, showing them those different colors. Oh, what zone are you in? I see you're a little frustrated. Maybe you're in the yellow zone, like things like that, using a great visual. And yeah, prompts are great. So that is all I have. And thank you guys. Hopefully we can start, you know, working all together.
Can you kind of shift the microphone over to Dr. Burke? So part of what Jay Burke and Associates do at Perspectives Academy, as well as in his practice, is groups and kind of group therapy. And he is going to talk a little bit about how he's working with those kids and the parents in more of those adolescent years and how to then incorporate it into the community in some ways. So, Dr. Burke, take it away.
Am I talking now?
You can speak.
2 hours on social skills in 20 minutes. Is that okay? How many guys remember social skills instruction when you were in school?
No.
No, right? Why? This is the participation part of the presentation. So anyway, think about this. Why are we teaching social skills in school? Why is that something we're doing now? Because if you think back about it, we didn't get this when we were in school, right? Anybody brave enough to throw an idea out there about why?
Technology,
Technology, right? What's up with technology?
they don't communicate with everything.
Everything becomes what?
And then what?
Everything becomes, how is technology changing?
I mean, no one's speaking to each other.
Not directly, right?
No.
Texting becomes the main way kids are communicating. How many guys have school-age kids that are here? Are you seeing the difference? Because kids will say to me, why should I go to a kid's house when I can just hop on online and I don't have to go to their house, I can just play a game. Electronics are changing the world. Communications through texting. I'll tell you a story real quick. Had a kid last week, really nice kid, super nice kid, a little bit spectrum-ish, just sweet kid, and he went to high school this year, and he's 14, and he found the love of his life in marching band, which is great, right? And he, of course, started texting her and missed the cue of how many times you text somebody. So if you're a guy and you're interested in this girl, how many times you text her, what would be reasonable? Where do you learn that? Right, that's not taught. So how many times do you think you text somebody? 1 time, 2 times, 3 times a day, 5 times, 10 times? Sort of depends on the reception of the other person. Would you all agree with that or not? So it's texted too much. Finally, I don't know how you guys would read this, but he got a text back from her friend saying, you need to stop. We don't want to be friends with you anymore. Dashed him on the rocks and he became suicidal. And he had 3 plans to kill himself, which were very lethal plans. And I think sometimes people don't read how something's communicated in text. And our communication has changed a great deal in this world that we have with kids. Second part, what do you think? How's the pandemic affected kids' social skills?
Oh, they're like years behind now.
Yeah, what do you think they're behind on?
All the communication skills,
Mhm.
waiting turns, sharing, talking, anything. They've lost more than a year or 2 of education.
Right. How old's your kid?
13.
Yeah, so if you have little kids, interesting enough, they might not even had experiences in a typical setting where they're having to do social skills. And kids I found that jump from elementary school to middle school, big jump, change socially, they missed that because of the pandemic. And if they were online, also academically, that's fascinating because they all learned how to Google answers. And if your kid had 2 screens, trust me, the second screen was not just for the extra schoolwork. So kids learned all kinds of things that were different. So what I'm finding is even what I'm doing with kids, so I have 15 different social skills groups that run in my office. I start with little kids age 6, and my oldest guys are age 30 now, or still in group. And working on social skills in the workplace, because even those have changed, because a lot of people are working remote. So that's changed adult life. Anybody here working remote? Yeah, so that's a whole different world, and you can get isolated in that. So I think that the whole system is sort of changing over. Now we look at this. Last summer, well, for the past couple of summers, I've run camp. So we run a social skills electronic reduction camp. And the social skills camp is a week overnight, and they cannot have a phone. All right. So kids are like, I'm getting my phone. Where's it gonna be? Marianne was there. She had a lock in the car because kids thought that people were gonna come and take their phone. And one of my favorite stories I can tell you is I have this kid who's 13, who's on probation, who's a behavior problem at home, addicted to electronics. Whole story I'm not gonna go into. Was at camp and turned out to be one of my Leaders Club kids, was the greatest behaved kid. And the doc called me and asked what went on. And the kid said to me, I was busy all week. I was not on electronics, and I was having fun with friends. And if you all remember, nobody taught us social skills. Where did you learn social skills from? Who remembers the neighborhood? Name one rule you learned in the neighborhood. Don't piss off the bigger kids. You guys remember that rule? So kids now, I don't think, how many guys, your kids go out and play in the neighborhood, play outside and just hang out and do those kind of things? You know, so that's great if they have those experiences. So I put down some things about social skills. It's really hard to do this in 20 minutes, but I'm gonna do my best. Here's the main key. Schools are doing this, it's great. Okay, I have groups, I'm running social skills groups, they're ongoing groups. That's great. But the whole thing has to be wrapped into what you're doing also at home. It has to be a 360-degree program. Because if you don't have a 360-degree program, it's not gonna work. So when you see your kid doing something socially wrong, what do you do? Anybody ever thought about this? Yeah. Especially if you're a teenager, who's got teens looking up? Who's got ankle biter kids still in elementary school or younger, anybody? So if they're a teenager, you want to be careful that you don't maybe humiliate them in front of their friends. So that's kind of hard. Little kids, you can sort of pull out a little bit. So any parents here, what do you do when you see your kids making a socially bad move? Yeah.
I think we make better choice.
Do they know the choice?
Usually he does, so he wants to make better choice.
I think the kids want to do well. Do they read the cues? And that's what you were talking a little bit about. Because we can teach these things, but reading these things in the circumstance is a lot harder. So I go, I'm in the red zone. Red zone, that's great, they recognize it, but are they going to move on that in that circumstance? So that's, we want to instill it, and then we want to have them use it in the situation. Anybody else have a thought about when you see your kid making the wrong social move, what you do?
I follow up and ask him help with something.
Yeah,
He's 13, I don't want to embarrass him in front of his friends.
yeah,
And then I talk about whatever he's doing briefly, ask him like, how would you feel?
excellent. How many guys text your kid? Is that amazing? Like you can text your kid and go, hey, you might want to think about what you're doing. Now, the best time to figure out what your kid's doing is when they're in your car in the back seat with their friends, right? Because they're trapped and you can find out what's really happening. But there's these coachable moments that I really would like y'all to think about. Now, the first thing, let me just give you this as a parent, because it's a parent-oriented type thing. One is to assess, does the kid know what they're doing wrong? So if you can pull the kid out and you say, do you see something going on? Because what happens a lot of times is parents are quick to do, you're doing this. You're talking too much about trains like you were talking about. And they don't read that cue. So if they know what they're doing, that's the first step. Okay, if they don't know what they're doing, then we have to inform them. So I ask parents to step away the furthest first and to say, do you know what your kids, do you know what you're doing? If they don't, then informing them what they're doing, then sometimes pulling them out is important. So what response to what your kid's telling you, challenging impacting social skills? So they've had a loss of skills. We have to teach some of these skills that they haven't gotten. If they don't know the skill, it's not fair to punish them for not having the skill. We don't want to humiliate them for not having the skill. So skills I see in group, example, I have kids that have no clue how to continue a conversation. Okay, so how to keep a conversation going at lunch table, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I call like a tennis match, y'all know what I'm talking about, versus kids that have problems when there's a group of kids and it's moving a lot faster. And I would like y'all to think about this because I'm intertwining these thoughts as I move real quick here. You have to think about why your kid is struggling with the social skills. This is super important as a parent. So there are things, a lot of kids I have that, for example, have expressive language problems. They have word recall problems, so they can't come up with things quick enough. They have processing speed issues. And if they have a fundamental issue that's creating a social problem, if you don't fix that issue, then on top of it, you're just creating more problems because you're not getting at the core issue. Okay, how many of you guys have a kid on an IEP or so you've seen the test? How many of you know how to read the testing and look at processing speed, working memory? Does anybody know what I'm talking about right now? If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should talk with somebody who does and look at that if they're having trouble socially, because working memory means what they can keep in their mind at a time. Processing speed is how quickly they can run that ship through the situation. Example, me talking to Lanny at a lunch table, back, forth, is way different than 6 kids at a lunch table flying around the lunch table. Second example, where you sit at a lunch table. So if you're having trouble socially, where do you want to sit? That's where they do sit, right? Why do they go by themselves?
Because of anxiety and they don't wanna, it's too much.
It's too much. It moves too quick. I have kids that'll come in. We have some really interesting things that happen in group. I asked kids last week to present what's a social situation that you face that you don't know how to deal with. They would like to know how other kids deal with. More than one kid said, I went into the lunchroom, kids told me go away from the lunch table. So what do? You just go sit by yourself. And it's like Lord of the Flies in the cafeteria because nobody's really watching anything and nobody's really helping with that. So loss of skills. So mental health since the pandemic has really picked up. There's some research out there that young adults ages 18 to 30, 1 out of every 4 adults is having some kind of mental health problem. That's huge, right? What do you think is the #1 mental health issue for kids right now? Anxiety. And social anxiety is a big part of it. A lot of that is because they haven't had experiences. So what happens is they escape. So they escape online, they escape in video games, they escape in all those places. Okay, and when you escape, there's what's called an approach avoidance curve for anxiety. So the closer you're getting to the thing that makes you nervous, the more you want to back away from it. Does that make sense? Everybody's felt this before from something, public speaking, whatever their thing is. Okay, and so they escape and avoid, and then they get further and further behind on those skills. So kids now say, I have friends, and I'll say, do the friends live within 5 miles? No, one lives in France, one's in Alaska. Now, anybody got older kids that have friends online? Okay, what's the thought on that? Are those friends? You don't think so?
You're not interacting with all online, it's all through the technology. I mean,
Yeah,
they're having conversations and they're playing the game together, but they're not doing anything in person. But I also know my youngest, he met some of his girlfriends through Snapchat and he talked to her 8 months and then in person.
he thinks they're girlfriends. Wait till you meet them, make sure. Yeah, but true, people are meeting that way. And I think that's a part of it too. So escaping, it also becomes a preferred world. So if I ask you the money that is now being spent in the world for entertainment, music industry, or gaming, which do you think ranks the highest? Gaming outspends both the other two put together. Okay, so kids are being hooked into games, which is changing things. Now, it doesn't mean games are bad, because games can be good if they're used right. So socially, that's a piece of it. Phones. How many guys, what age does your kid get a phone? Yeah, so, and nowadays, this is fascinating, because if you're in middle school and you don't have a phone, you're really socially isolated. Because there's group text, group chat, things like that, and it's very hard to be involved in those types of things. So they get in this preferred world, more electronics than ever, lack of opportunities. So everybody think about activities you did when you were a kid that you got social with. Can you yell out some? Sports, band,
Theater,
what's that?
theater.
Yeah, theater. And those are all what I call springboard activities. So getting your kid involved in the springboard activity is really important. So what'll happen is people say you have to join something at school. So they join an activity where they show up and leave. What we're looking for is springboard activities. So if you're in band, you go out after the game. If you're in drama, you're with the drama crew. If you're in stage crew. So one of the big things I tell parents, if you have a kid that has social issues, I know this will sound crazy, but get them playing an instrument when they're little. Because later on, it leads to being able to be in marching band or drum or something like that. And those are really nice universally accepting groups that are out there. So I talked about processing speed and working memory. If they have those problems, you want to work on those with a speech person or a therapist, because you're building on a bad foundation. They're going to back away from the social issues because of the bad foundation. Push the button. Thank you. All right. So what impacts social skills? So how many people have kids on the spectrum? Anybody here? Okay, so let's talk about spectrum for a minute. So kids on the spectrum is, of course, a spectrum of spectrum kids, which goes every which way from Sunday. But one important skill, if you have a kid on the spectrum, is theory of mind. Theory of mind is where they have the most difficulty. Theory of mind is, how do I see it? How do you see it? Here's the hardest part. How do I change my behavior based on the way you see it? Okay, so all the parents of kids on the spectrum, what's their high interest area? Anybody have a trained kid? No trained kids? One trained kid. What's their high interest areas?
Lego.
Legos, yeah. Harry Potter, Minecraft. Any other ones? Cars, presidents, and they know their stuff, right? And to them, it's really exciting and interesting, and there's nothing wrong with that. Because I have kids that grow up that are trained kids. If you're a trained kid, you guys know the term rail fan? You can be a rail fan. And there's a curve. This is more than you ever want to know, but there's a curve in Pennsylvania, which is the tightest turn in Pennsylvania, where you can see the back and front of the train at the same time. So I have kids that go on vacation to stay there, to watch the trains go on the curve. So if you're interested, I can tell you more. So all the kids come in and I go, I love chairs. There's a white chair. It's a really nice chair. You want to see my white chair? I really like white chairs. This one's hard. You want to sit on it? It's like, what are you talking about? The parents are like, do you have a point? And I'm trying to get them to see, okay, how do I see it? I see chairs as interesting. You don't see chairs as interesting? I'm going to change my mind with that. There's a book I wrote called Code Shifting: Social Skills in the Screen Age. The idea is that it's not a bad skill, it's just the wrong situation. So if you're with other rail fans, can you talk about trains? Absolutely, right? If you're with people that aren't rail fans, trains are like, we're not interested in trains. So knowing when to turn it on and turn it off. What we don't want to say is don't do that. What we want to say is pick your situation where it makes the most sense and it works well for those kids. So kids with autism have theory of mind issues that get them in the most trouble socially. Anybody got kids with ADHD? Aren't they fun? Okay, so my favorite saying with ADHD kids is they go ready, go, set. If you're a parent of one, you sort of get that. Okay, so kids with ADHD, when you sit them down and teach social skills, they know what to do. Would you all agree with me? When you sit with a kid and go, what should you have done in this situation? Most of the ADHD kids will tell you, I should have done blah, 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 and they're right. The problem is in the moment, they're not doing it. So a couple really important tips. I do think once, think twice. So think once, if I do this, what'll happen? Think twice in 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days. Is this a good decision? Because they don't think down the line with them. Second one, this is great. They love this one. If your mom was standing here, would you make the same decision? Okay, because they're impulsive and they do stuff. And this is where a lot of the kids get in trouble. Give you the third one I do, which is if you're the only kid doing it, it's probably a bad idea. So a lot of my ADHD kids, great kids, but get suckered into. One of my kids, true story, was at high school and they started playing music on their phones on Spotify, got him up on the lunch table dancing, and all the kids were cheering. And he thought he was socially included for once. And actually what was happening was he was being made a fool. I got mad at the school about this because they actually suspended my kid. That kid, because he was disruptive to the other lunchroom, which nothing happened to the kids who set him up. Don't you think something should happen to the kids that set up the kid to get on the lunch table?
You need an advocate.
Yeah, I'm gonna send Hickman ladder. There's a new diagnosis called DMDD. This is super important. This is called disruptive mood dysregulation disorder. Really angry little sucker is the diagnosis. And maybe some of you have a kid like this, and you can think about this. These are kids that go from 0 to 100 super quick up. And again, they know the social skill, but they flare up really quick. So this summer at my camp, we had one of the favorite things kids do is play Gaga. Are y'all familiar with Gaga? Gaga is a great game because it's like dodgeball in a pit. And little kids have an advantage because you can only hit a kid from the knee to the ankle. So the big tall kids are easier targets because they got more leg room. And what happens is there are kids that no matter what we do front end loading, as soon as that kid is called out, they're flipping out, swearing, throwing things. Anybody got a kid like this? So what we want to do is front end load, super important, what to do when you're getting called out and you don't think it's right. Second thing is there are kids that go from 0 to 100, and I'm not a big meds guy, but there are certain kids that need meds because the meds will keep them be able to contain themselves long enough to use the skills they're learning. If you've seen kids flip a switch, sometimes you don't have time to get in there. And I, as a therapist, don't have time to get the kid to use the skill, get them on the mat. It's what I call pulsed intervention. Because a lot of parents are like, I don't want to put my kid on meds. The answer is maybe 6 months of that med, build the skills, get them off the med, then they have the skills are really important. Because when they flare up and they start throwing things and punching people, then they get through the network of parents and parents don't want to get over there. And that's a problem. Can I push the button? Thank you.
Yeah, no.
Okay, good. Okay, empowering parent. How can you help your child navigate such a situation? You can help your child do hard things, missing elements. So number one is repetition. So just because you teach it to them once does not mean it's going to work. You got to repeat it many times. Okay, trust me, it's really true. If I do it in therapy, if they're doing it in school, if you're doing it at home, it's going to work better. Okay, the same words. You want to use the same words that are there with lots of repetition. Also, sometimes the best practices are siblings, because if their siblings are there, that's who they're going to interact with the most. Seamless approach means across all those places that everybody's cooperating on those terms of what we're working on. Don't pick like 5 social skills. Pick 1 or 2 that you're working on, target those, work those, and then we work the next step. Multimodality teaching. Remember, some kids learn better by seeing, hearing, touching, doing. Okay, a great thing to do, super easy, but I just give you these, is if you watch a movie or a show with the sound turned off, ask kids what's happening socially in that situation. It's really kind of a fun family thing to do to see if they can read the social cues that are current. Okay, Lord of the Flies. So most of my kids have trouble not in the structured situations in school, but unstructured. So Lord of the Flies occurs where? Playground, where else? Lunch. Bus, right? Where are kids supposed to first exposed to porn? The bus. Trust me, I can tell you that from a million kids. The older kids show the younger kids the porn on their phone. So you warn your kid about that. The playground, what happens on the playground? Well, you think math class is structured, everything's structured, but then you get on the playground and he touched my stuff. They went on the swing first. And I have a lot of kids that just don't understand how to deal with the Lord of the Flies playground routine. Usually the teachers aren't out there, there's somebody's mom or something like that. So there needs to be a plan for the playground. Here's something to ask for. Push in services. Push in are different than pull out. Pull out, like at our school, we do pull out at my office, but we also do push in. Push in means somebody's out there at recess. Somebody's in there in the situation they're gonna have trouble with. Because the best time to teach is when it's occurring, or else you've got the Lord of the Flies routine. Super supervised. So kids today don't play without adults like we do. Anybody remember playing in the neighborhood on the streets and stuff? Anybody remember getting in a fight? How'd you solve a fight? Nobody got in a fight? Anybody got in a disagreement? Yeah, you solve yourself. You beat up the other kid, you knock him down, it was over with, whatever. Kids today are super supervised in all these situations. They're in religious class, they're in classrooms, they're here, and they have trouble when there's not that supervision. So giving them the skills of what to do when there's not a super supervised situation, like life on the playground, and that's an example of, you know, how to navigate those types of things. Okay, so real quick, also concrete thinkers. So a lot of kids on the spectrum, very concrete, very black and white. You all have seen this before, I assume. Okay, so it's either right or wrong, black or white, things like that. So we want to work on shades of gray. Very important. So you were talking about this. We just did 2 weeks ago a group, big deal, little deal. Okay, what's a big deal? What's a little deal? And how do I respond to it? Because if you notice, a lot of our kids that have trouble, everything is a big deal. And they respond to it with like overkill. So we want to work on that. And they also have to interpret information right if they're a concrete thinker. So one of my favorite stories I'm going to tell you is running a social skills group, bunch of younger kids. And this kid was ADHD on the spectrum and just being annoying. That's not a diagnosis, but that's was the way it was being. Fun kid, he's a really good kid. And anybody have a kid who just can't sit still and probably was at school all day, his Ritalin was wearing off and he's like jacked. So I said, if you don't sit in your seat, I'm going to rip your arm off and beat you with the bloody stumpy end of your own arm. And he looked at me like, and all the other kids were like laughing, and he thought I was like serious because kids on the spectrum miss the joke. You know what I'm saying? So my point of that was I learned quickly how to teach humor in the group because a lot of the kids don't understand humor that kids are doing because a lot of kids shoot humor at each other. How many of you guys have been in the car and heard like joking going on and your kids missing the joke that kids are saying or something like that? So we get that all the time. So we're working on teaching that humor to the kids. So on purpose, I joke with certain kids in my groups that know how to handle the humor so that kids can see how we bounce that back and forth. And I think I have one last slide. Okay, what is funny, what is silly? That actually changes as kids age, because what age does silly go out? Anybody got thought about this? Okay, this is really bad, but girls goes out earlier than boys. Okay, if you're a girl in a group of girls being silly and immature, they're going to vote you off the island. Boys can get away with it longer, like fart jokes. What age do fart jokes about with guys? How many guys are married? Never. All right, so the point is humor being appreciated because I teach my kids in group to be friends with people, you have to be fun. You have to be interesting and you have to be interested. Now think about that for a second. Kids want to be around kids that are fun. You have to be interesting. You have to have something interesting to talk about, not just chairs. And you have to be interested in the other person. As they get older, friendships change. It's not just somebody to play with. It's something that you're interested in being friends with. That's the last slide or was it one more? Oh, school success. Well, last one. I often get the out of the corner, make the connection, you see them. So struggle at the lunch table. So what is it like to be at the lunch table? Anybody remember lunch tables when we were kids? So I went to Wiley Middle School. They had French fries and pizza every day for lunch. Sometimes they had tater tots, so it was an off day. Anybody remember kids that threw French fries? Okay, and they were aiming at the kid that did what? Okay, they got upset. So once kids know that they're getting upset, you're on their target. You have to teach kids to not react to that, because once you're on the radar as a kid that gets over upset, kids are going to react to that. Ignoring, what do we tell them to do? Ignore it. Does that work? No, because you look mad, so that doesn't work. So I'll tell you my 7th grade story. Kids were throwing French fries. This kid whipped the French fry, me, grabbed it out of the air, ate it, and said, "Thanks, throw another one." That was that. Got rid of that whole problem. Okay, tennis ball, back and forth conversation, remember, versus lunch table, where it's going around, where you sit. You want to sit in the middle of the table because you want to be involved in it. And also, I teach kids to have a wingman. So wingman, when I was younger, trying to find my wife, who I met because she lost the job that I took. That's all another story. I went out to the bars to meet people. And I was not the best socially, but I had a friend who was really good looking and talked to any ladies. That's the person you send in the bar first. Does anybody remember bar days? Okay, and then after about 2 minutes, you follow them in. And then you find the people that are around that person. So what I teach my kids to do is to have a wingman. So if you're having a problem at the lunch table, if you're doing something wrong, if you're missing something socially, a trusted kid will tell you, "Hey, you talk too much about this. I want to do that." Having a trusted insider is really good for a lot of our kids because it makes sense for them. It has to be the right kid, but there are a lot of really kind kids out there who will help kids that miss these social cues. So I think that was the last slide.
All right, so now,
Oh, wait, can I do my joke?
yes, you go.
Can you back up? Can you read that? That's actually, I did this worksheet and kids had to say what their friends, what their good friend is. And they laugh at your jokes even though they're terrible. So I thought that was fun. All right, that's it.
Okay, so I'm obviously gonna have to be a flexible thinker because somebody went way over.
That wasn't too bad.
Oh, my goodness. Anyway, so my role here today is to have you take all of this together. So I'm gonna ask you to raise your hands again. Tell me who is on an IEP. Not you personally, but your child. Okay, so you have an IEP. All of this information, all of the zones of regulation and all of the how to handle the lunchroom, that needs to be defined within your IEPs. And how are we going to do that? I find that families feel that districts aren't listening to them and they won't use the word or they won't identify it here. I'm going to tell you right now, pause. I have a place for everything. Okay, so I'm just going to go really quickly through the IEP process and I'm going to show you where you have control. I'm going to show you where your words matter. And I'm going to show you that when you walk out of the meeting, you're going to be like, victory. And they're not even going to know it. They're going to think they did what they always do, right? The district is typically in control of the meeting, but I'm going to have the tone set so you feel that you're in control of it because you should be, because this is your child. So here we go. The planning meeting. The planning meeting is the beginning meeting where you suspect, and I'm going to go really quick because I want to be sensitive to time. The planning meeting is where we suspect does your child have a disability? If they say yes, here we go. Here's the ride. We're diving in. Now we're going to decide what assessments. This is when Jay said outside providers, outside information matters You need to bring everything together. So if you know you're having a planning meeting and you're going to be suspecting, you need to bring those documents to the table at that moment and time. So when they say, well, we don't really see anything, you can throw the documents right in front of them and they can be like, oh, wow, I didn't realize the processing speed was here. I didn't realize the working memory was here. Oh, all right, I can see that. The other problem I find that families have is that they have an outside diagnosis and they don't understand why the district isn't recognizing it. Well, the child's on the spectrum, the child is autistic, but why can't I get an IEP? Because if they don't show the behavior in the classroom, if they don't show that they are not academically thriving and doing well or socially, some districts will only talk about the academic piece and forget to talk about the social piece. If you don't show that, you're not going to qualify. So yes, you can have a diagnosis. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to qualify. So you have to unpack that. What does it look like? Your notes matter. How does he feel when he comes home? What does that look like? Bring that to the meeting. How many emails have you received from the teacher saying that this and that happened? Bring that to the meeting. I call them non-emotional timelines. It's where you actually look at your emails and you gather all the times the teacher has called you, all of the times the teacher has emailed you, and all of the times they sent you home, sent the child home, and it wasn't even reported. You put that on a document, it ends up being a couple pages. You bring that to the meeting and, okay, we're going to suspect. We're going to do the assessments. So we've done the assessments, okay? The assessments are done. You need to remember as a mom and a dad, as a parent, as a guardian, wherever you are at this point in time in the meeting, that there are certain places and times to have conversations. During the planning meeting is when you're kind of fighting hard. Okay, you're fighting hard because you want this child to get qualified under one of the 13 categories, because then the assessments, after you get that, you can pause. That's not the time to get into the nitty-gritty of what it should look like. That's not the time to be doing that. So now we've done our ETR, okay? You brought your outside provider information in, you have your zones regulation information in, you have an FBA, we've got everything in a nice packet. I'm going to assume that this child qualified. For simplicity of time, we're not going to have a big debate right now. This child qualified. This, when you're going to the next stage and you're going to develop the IEP, before you leave that ETR meeting, you're going to look at the person who is taking the notes. Do you know, when you're in the meeting, do you ever identify who's the note taker? Moving forward now on in, you're going to identify who the note taker is as soon as you sit down, because you're going to look at that person and you're going to say, Jay, you're writing my prior written notice, and he'll say yes. And so I want to make sure you identify in my IEP that this person will receive zone of regulation or something like. I want to make sure that we recognize that he really struggles in unstructured places, that we are working on the playground and you have something put in on, say it again. And I want some push-in. I want to make sure that you identify all of these areas because they were already identified in the ETR. And I want them to have that in the prior written notice. So when you get that prior written notice, you know you were understood. And that's my role, is to make sure you were heard in that meeting. You tell the person who's writing the prior written notice to identify that. You can go home once they give you that prior written notice. You can see that they really heard you. I also recommend that you have them repeat it back. Got a little social skills within your IEP meeting, right? So you actually say to them, yeah, social skills training for your IEP process. So you actually have the individual who's writing the prior written notice to repeat what you want. And if they miss, you tell them what you want added in. Okay, I am not on that by mine. So this is why I can't click. So identifying the planning meeting, the evaluation team report, the IEP, and the prior written notice. My goal here for you is to understand each serve a different purpose, and you need to know where and when you ask your questions during the ETR meeting is not when you're asking about what it looks like. That's when you're identifying what is needed. I'm not going to go into this, but I think if they're going to get these slides, I want you to take this home and maybe photocopy this page when you're going to your, when you're looking at your, IEP, and make sure that it's clear, right? That it's measurable, that it makes sense. I have this, one of my favorite clients in Columbus, and he has Down syndrome, and they wanted to teach him how to tie a shoe. And the mom was like, I really don't care if he can tie a shoe. I would rather he learned A, B, and C. So we took it out of the IEP. We did more bilateral movement, and we walked away from, that's okay. You are the parent. You can decide that. So make sure that it is relatable and it's something that you actually want the child to learn. When you talk about the IEP, and when you talk about that this goal is going to be within this year, I want you to keep in mind that when you look at last year's IEP and then you look at next year's IEP, was there any growth? Did the progress report show that there was no growth? Then why did they change that goal? That's important. That's really important. So I know I'm giving you more work, but you really need to look at those progress reports. You really need to make sure that the progress report relates to the goal and that the following year it's ambitious. And then it needs to be ambitious enough so that moving forward, we're going to see progress. Let's see. So photocopy that one slide and bring it with you when you're looking at your IEPs so you can have this in front of you. Categories. If you go online, the categories are not identified through definitions in your new procedural safeguards, but they are in the old Whose Idea Act is it? Does anyone know does anyone remember that one? Okay, I recommend you look it up online because the definitions are there and it's good for you to read. If you are going into a meeting and you are going between other health impairment and emotional disturbance, I want you to read those or ask the director of special ed to read those definitions out loud because it's the definitions that qualify, not the emotions at the table. It's not the person at the table who really wants to do OHI because they're scared to do emotional disturbance because it is not a very kind label, but it's not a label, it's just a category. It doesn't mean anything. Once he graduates, it means nothing. It means nothing at all. So know your definitions and know them well. And if you have the energy to do this, I recommend you bring a copy of the definitions to the meeting so everyone can review them. To me, this 10 years ago, if you would have asked me to talk about this, I would have said, oh my God, I'm never even talking about this. But I think it's important that people understand the difference between clinical DSM-5 diagnosis that Dr. Cheryl Chase has given you versus the category that the district has decided on. So you can be on the spectrum, you can be autistic and not qualify under autism because you're not demonstrating those behaviors within the academic setting, which is a mom and a dad sitting over there. You're thinking, oh my gosh, they might do more at home. They might demonstrate more of those behaviors at home and they don't demonstrate them at school. It's really hard for me to qualify someone under autism with an autism diagnosis that's getting straight A's and is a student council president. It's a really difficult dialogue. You can try, I like to try, but it's a hard one. So I really want you to take a deep breath and recognize just because you have dyslexia doesn't necessarily mean that you qualify for specific learning disability. It's how it looks in the academic setting. That's what decides how they qualify. I feel like I just felt like a huge whirlwind. When you're in these meetings, it can be incredibly emotional. I have sat in a meeting before with the director of special ed. I got a little weepy, the mom got a little weepy, looked at both of us and said, who's the parent? I mean, you're just kind of intense, right? And my role is to make sure that these kids get what they need. I only have 45 minutes because they don't want an hour meeting, right? So I have a short period of time to show what needs to happen and how I think we should move forward as a team. But you also need to respect where everyone is, right? So You need to remember, if the speech teacher isn't seeing the deficit and the report says that there is no deficit, I need to respect that. I really do. It's hard sometimes because they're coming home maybe stuttering and you don't understand why they're stuttering at home and they're not stuttering in school. Like there is something about that, but you pause and you have to respect it. I don't know if anyone remembers this poem. Do you guys remember learning this one back in the day? So it's basically about individuals who are looking at an elephant, and everybody is looking at this elephant at a different point of view. And some see the deficit here and others don't. So it's just something to think about when you're in these meetings. I know it can be incredibly emotional. I have many moms kicking me under the table. We have our little like keep going or mom keep going. We have our little buzzwords to make sure that we're all feeling confident and strong in these meetings. A lot of my moms will say, I just slept 2 hours after the meeting. I know they're hard, but the better you prepare and the more you know, the results will be in your favor. And being fair and kind to the educators sometimes can be hard because I know you're frustrated, but it does help to play nice in the playground, right? So, oh, and my takeaways, but I think my one takeaway would be that I really want to leave on is section 7. I want everyone to go home and look at section 7. If your child is having a difficult time socially, your child is having a difficult time interacting in the playground or at the cafeteria, make sure that the numbers, the hours that they are receiving represents what they need. If you're not seeing progress on those progress reports, you go back to your district and meet. They want to hear from you. I know it sometimes doesn't, they don't, but they do. They want to hear from you and they want to help you. You show that you're concerned about the amount of hours, show that there isn't progress on the progress report. You have, you're valid. That's a valid meeting. I would highly recommend you meet with your district. So I hope we brought all this together.
Can I say 2 things related to that real quick?
Yeah.
Number one, because
You have.
Mary Jo's great. One thing is, if you hear these words, we don't think it needs an IEP anymore. Be careful. Because once you lose an IEP, it's very hard to regain. Also, does anybody have kids on 504 plans? There is a big difference between a 504 and IEP. If you don't know the difference, you want to know the difference because there's a huge amount of differences between those two. So if they say, let's try them out, see how it goes on a 504 plan, you want to really talk to Mary Jo about that to make sure there's no protection to the degree that an IEP has compared to a 504. Ask Mary Jo, she's good.
Well, there's actually protection, but we won't
To
go.
the degree.
We won't go over that.
See why we like in person? There's so much dialogue. Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing everything with us. I just want to put a little plug in for our next session, which is actually on those challenges and the opportunities of technology. We build the content based on what you tell us you want to hear about. So please let us know, fill out the survey from today. Again, we will bring in speakers. Likely Dr. Burke will do a lot on that because you heard today, a lot of that has impacted his work and he's done a lot of research in that area. So please come back, come in person, or join us online. Now and bring a friend. Yeah. Now we have our question and answer portion. Those of you online, please put your question into the Q&A box. And those of you here, we will repeat the question so that everyone can hear it. And then Jody will kind of deflect it to one of our experts here.
Hey, Jody.
And there was, for those of you online, there was an issue with the Q&A box, but it is fixed. So if you want to resubmit any questions, you can. But if there are any questions for those of you who are here, just let me know, raise your hand, and we'll make sure that you get those answered.
So we just had our IEP meeting like 2 weeks ago, and a lot of it was really helpful. And it's our second year from on an IEP. We started on a 504 and it's sort of useless. So can I go back even though we just signed this?
Yes, yes.
Because a lot of the social skills piece is his biggest deficit. And I don't feel like what they worked in had any of what you talked about today, and I think we benefit from.
So what I would recommend you do, and this is for everybody, I would recommend you take a deep breath and collect your thoughts on exactly what you want to see different.
Okay.
And I want you to email them a couple days before and give them some dates and say, I would like to meet with the team. I don't see this webbed in within his IEP. Can we discuss A, B, and C? Here's my availability. So now they will respond, they will know what you're looking for, and you also have times given to them. So it's an easy transaction. You want to make it easy and simple. So they know what you want, they know the timing, and you're good to go. Yeah.
What if they tell her no? We have had districts say, we just met, we will meet annually, and they're being served by JV anyway.
You just email them right back and say, I really want to meet, like,
Okay.
no.
And what's the recourse there if they don't?
Call me.
I know.
I know Mary Jo O'Neill and I can use her. That's a recourse.
Thank you.
Call me.
Thank you.
You know, there is that funny thing about people think, and Mary Jo taught me this, that just because your IEP's there and they go, the next IEP meeting is a year from now. You can have an IEP as many times as you want to.
Okay.
So,
It's okay. You have every right to ask.
Okay.
And if you're, seriously, on a serious note, if the team won't meet, you reach out to your director of special ed.
Okay.
So if you have, my son is on an IEP, if I go on a second year and I'm noticing there's no gain in his goal, and we continue at a second year, especially a social goal. At what point do we sort of say,
Now.
okay, the school can't do this, I need to find external help, or, you know what I'm
So-
saying?
Yeah, so you're in a public school.
No, we're in private.
Okay, so you're in a private school. Are you taking the John Peterson?
Autism.
Okay, yeah. And you're not seeing growth where you are at this point?
Correct. Well, so we went to a different school last year, but it was in a row. We're starting a new school this year, so we have time. So
Okay.
So I get a quarter, 2 quarters, we don't see it, especially the social goal. At what point do I say they need to find help or?
So if you're not, if you're in a different setting right now,
Yeah.
my number one thing is keep looking at those progress reports.
Okay.
And while you're looking at those progress reports, I would also be talking to your teachers about outside resources. And bring those outside resources maybe to the school after school or on the weekends. And if you're still not seeing support, you might want to dive in and do an IEE, an independent educational evaluation, because maybe there's something we're missing. You know, if you've had those progress reports, you've met with the team, you've done outside, talk to your teachers if you're with right now. And I would be very mindful when you're reading those progress reports. And if you're not seeing progress, collect that data. You know, I looked at 2000 and, December's progress reports. I did not see progress on A, B, and C. So you can always go back to it. So you're not looking at the whole document. And then also in your little filing system, right? We also went to go see Jay Burke. We also went to do this and we also went to do that. And then in March, you're still not seeing change. I would have an evaluation done, because I think we're missing something. And that's called an independent educational evaluation.
Let me piggyback one thing on that for you. If a kid's not progressing well, sometimes the school doesn't have the depth of resources to figure out why they're not doing that. For example, kids on the spectrum, a lot of kids have OCD issues. So although they're learning behavior, they're stuck obsessing about something. And so they're not kind of able to deal with that. So I try to analyze, is it a school issue or is it a missing skill issue? Or what's underlying it?
They're called lagging skills. And sometimes we forget sometimes we're reaching here and missed some of those lagging skills. Dr. Green is amazing and he has an assessment on lagging skills. You can look him up and it's GREEN, Dr. Green, lagging skills. And that might help you. And that's just a screening. It's actually not an in-depth assessment. It's just a screening.
My question is, I actually work with Mary Jo. I don't know if you remember. But why, I still don't understand why the school pushes back on IEPs. My daughter was on a 504 for 4 years, and I trusted the school, and they just weren't giving her what she needs. I tried to avoid going with an advocate. I ended up doing it, and the very first meeting I had Mary Jo, I got an IEP. What is the pushback? They still tell me, I'm Mary Jo. I'm like, I've been trying before. Yeah. But why? They get paid, they get money for it. It's not like money taken away from them.
Yeah, so if I would have answered that question 10 years ago, my response today would be a lot different. I have learned that I truly believe it's not that they don't want to, it's just that they're overwhelmed and they're stressed and they're not looking at everything. And it is funny, like sometimes I do go to a meeting and the mom's like, this meeting is so different because you're sitting here. It's really not me. It's the fact that you hired an advocate and I have Frank Hickman in my back pocket because they know I have Frank, who's the attorney. I can go to Frank Hickman at any point in time and say, this isn't working. And I have all of this data to show this child needs something. So I don't know the why.
Yeah.
I haven't figured that out. I really haven't.
And I'm gonna cut you off, but it also makes me nervous if I go to ask for another IEP meeting to amend it, that they're gonna pull things out. Because they pushed back so hard that I'm very hesitant to go, all right, I'm not happy. And then they're gonna go, okay, well then we're gonna take this, this, and this out, or whatever.
The data drives the services. Data drives the services. They'll come in with the data, have your outside provider bring in the data, and have your teachers write the reports. If the teachers are saying it's occurring, I mean, that would be my takeaway. The data drives the service.
We have some online questions. How can you help a child age 12 on the spectrum who says that they have no interest in making friends or engaging with peers? I think Dr. Burke, that might be good.
So
You put the microphone back.
that's really common. So it's identifying why the kid doesn't want to do that. If you think your average 12-year-old, they don't want to be different than any other kid. Would you guys all agree with that? So kids don't want to take medication in front of their buddies. They don't want to be pulled out for special classes, all those kind of things. And I think it's somebody working with them to get them to understand the importance of social skills in their lifetime, across their lifetime. Many kids don't, there's that saying, you don't know what meat tastes like if you've never eaten it. And so for a lot of the kids that have never had friends or social experiences that have been successful, that's where they sit. So that's where I would say they need to see somebody to help them analyze what they're missing and why they don't want those skills from the school. There are times, to be honest, where the school is not the best supplier of that. I have kids that do better outside their school. Say example, in a group, because it's not with their peers from school, it's less embarrassing. It depends on the kid's social awareness of that. It also depends on the setting. Some schools, like everybody's getting pulled out for something different, like a JV kind of place, you don't stand out because it's all there. But a public school setting, you may feel like, whoa, I don't want to be that dude. So I would approach it from that aspect.
And then the next question is your thoughts or how a parent can work with a child and how they feel about themselves. So if they are being picked on or helping them not internalize some of the things that they get from outside peers.
Kids can be mean. Would y'all agree with that? Yeah, they can be really cruel. So I think your best protection is having a great relationship with your kid. So your kid feels comfortable in talking to you about things. There are some tricks I teach parents for just quick things. The kid can say to you, I want to tell you something, but don't go to the school about it. Because some kids won't come to you because they feel like you're gonna call the school and therefore they're not gonna say it. Some kids aren't aware that they're getting set up by other kids. They don't understand the situation. I think that's important to understand. I also will work with the school. This is important as a therapist. Because if I'm teaching social skills, but something's happening with the kid at school, I want to team up with the school. Because when a kid says this kid is doing something to me, I need to know, is that the kind of kid that's doing that to everybody? They're just a jerk to everybody, or they're targeting this kid on purpose. And so my answer to that would be your best protection, great relationship with the kid. Next part is great relationship with the school to be able to get some feedback. See, is it really happening? What do they see? And back related to your question about why schools don't react to this. If you take a big school district, think about it. Which kids are they servicing the most? They're gonna service the kid that's, throwing chairs, out of control, a hassle for them. Some of these kids that we're talking about aren't really necessary. You're upset about the situation, but it's not bringing up the radar on the kid. And there can be a lot of hidden damage in what you're asking right now that goes on year after year of kids not having that social growth. But they don't know anything different, so it's explaining to them what they're missing.
And then the second part of that question was, what are your thoughts on how to help them handle their feelings about themselves when it comes to their disability? So do you talk about their disability? Do you kind of like not bring up the label? What are your thoughts on that?
First of all, I hate the term disability. I think everybody's got differences, and I think that's what I approach it with kids. I wish y'all could see a group sometimes, because group is really cool to see kids come in and they're shy and something, and they go all of a sudden like, wait, there's other kids that take meds. I'm not the only kid that feels this way. I have autism, you have autism, but we're kind of different. So I think we have to take a strength-based approach instead of this disability thing. And the strength-based approach is everybody's got something they're working on. Some kids are gifted in math, but suck socially. Some kids are great socially, but suck in math. So is that a math disability? I don't know. But I think we got to approach it that way with kids, so it doesn't seem so something's wrong with you. It's just, you've got to work on this area that's you're not naturally so good for you. Who's got more than one kid? Anybody got more than one kid where one of your kids is like a rock star socially, and you could leave out food like a cat and they grow up by themselves, right? And then the other kid, you got to teach them some of these things, and it's just differences. That's what I want kids to think about. There's just natural things. Yeah.
So another piece of the question though is, can you and should you, if I heard it correctly, tell your child they have a disability? That's a tough one. I mean, first of all, what age, right? Like a little one, maybe not, but an older one, they can, and it's their maturity level. Like there's so many factors. I don't even know if I could respond on the when.
When they ask you questions.
When they ask you questions, so you're saying to me, when they ask you questions.
So the kid will start saying, why do I have one? Why does this happen?
So when the questions are being asked. Okay, all right. Thank you, Jen.
But that's my opinion. I don't want to cut off taking the on.
Well,
Frank,
so-
get back.
we really go back before they have to say, I think it's interesting, so this could be a whole nother discussion on, you call it it's a difference, right?
Yeah.
It's a disability. I like to call it a disability because it is a disability, and sometimes reading is really hard. It is a difference if I'm at a place like Julie Billiard, who understands how to teach me how to read, right? And if I go to a different setting and they don't have Orton-Gillian instruction, no, it's a disability there. It's a difference here. You, with your social and emotional group, you have created a difference. But when they walk out that building and they go into the real world, if they haven't mastered it to 100%, it's a disability. We go back and forth.
Yeah, so I'd say two things are different. One is, anybody got older kids, because they asked, should I reveal that I have this diagnosis for a job? And what do y'all think about that? Because they can't discriminate against you, but guess what? They will. Yeah, I've had kids with a lot of those problems, so that's a question that comes up in the older group. My second question is, I had a flat tire and didn't know how to fix the tire, so do I have a mechanical disability?
Yeah. Good idea.
Another question is, how can I encourage my son to engage in social situations? He has a lot to say at home and with adults, but when he is around other kids, he is quiet. He says he gets nervous, but I want to be able to encourage him, but not push.
I mean, I feel like just by like the practice, like giving your kid those opportunities to practice, maybe. You know, you're there with him or a teacher's there facilitating that at first. And then gradually like fading that back, but coaching them through those instances, like maybe coming up with different topics to talk about. Ways to make them more comfortable to join like in a conversation, join and play and. You know, starting with like the siblings, like maybe practicing with the siblings, so, and modeling that at home or in a comfortable situation. So that way, you know, they're able to then start generalizing that into the school environment at recess, at lunch. And
Why do most kids that have social issues hang with adults?
we're not judging them.
They're safe. Adults aren't gonna be, or they pick littler kids. Do y'all agree with that? Because you be the big kahuna. The challenges for the social anxiety, you want to get at what's the fear that's gonna happen? Like, what's the worst thing that's gonna happen if I approach these other kids? If you can get that out of the way and they have a plan, then we'll usually approach it. If not, they'll hang with the adults and the little kids.
And I will say, one of the things that we kind of do at JV is we'll say, what's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? And then it's probably gonna fall somewhere in between. So if they're thinking about all of the different opportunities, can kind of get different perspective taking as well. There are no other online questions. Are there any other questions?
So how does one improve on the processing speed and the working memory? You guys look over
Want to answer?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, go for it.
I would say, so visuals are really helpful, in clear cut, like expectations. So like writing things down for our kids, coming up with like little mnemonic devices. Yeah, so, and also just like working at it a lot, and then using, like, I would say those visuals, like we have kids who will have little Post-it notes written down, with clear cut expectations, what's expected of them. So that way they're, you know, able to kind of like be reminded without being called out in like those verbal prompts constantly, because that on top of it, I feel like kind of then clouds them as well.
There's not a great fix for it. There's working on it. So I would add two things to what you said, which I think would be helpful to you. One is helping the school situation. Like I do this to my group. I'll say, I'm gonna call on you next. And I go to Mary Jo first to give that kid time to think. The second is having the kid have a transition statement, like, can you give me a minute to think about that? Because that buys them some time. So a lot of kids are afraid to say that, but then they have enough time to think through it. So I think all those are possible.
And those can all be written in your IEP, right? That they get wait time. You can put wait time on your IEP or whatever the phrase is that they say, you know, whatever it may be, that can be written in the IEP so that the teacher next year, maybe the IEP is in the middle of the year, knows exactly what happened last year. So those were good advice. Those are good statements to use. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one more.
Up front, the cheap seats up front.
For kids who have like maybe suffered some heartbreak from trying to be friends with the average and then, you know, the average kid kind of turns their back, especially if they really internalize failure and, you know, getting things wrong, perfectionist. How do you repair that? I mean, I've got a kiddo who just doesn't even want to try again with
Yeah.
friends. I don't know how to get them back into that idea that you can be successful. How old another time? 9.
All right, so my answer to that would be, one is, for kids, there's kids that are what I call the gray zone kids. If y'all think about this, some kids with the typical kids have trouble because they're sort of struggling in that. With the special needs kids are sort of above that, they're in that gray zone. So we want to work on finding the right kids. Second thing is, they don't need 15 kids. They need 1 or 2. And 1 or 2 wins makes a big deal. And getting a win is huge. And getting them in the right situation when they get a win, and that could be crazy stuff that seem like, some kids, a D&D group gets them in a win, or they get involved in a Lego club, and it's the right kind of kids. You've got to get them around the kids that are the winners in terms of that situation. I'm not telling you this to pump my camp. I want to tell you this because it's really one of the most exciting things to me. At my camp, the last day we do award ceremony, which Mary Ann MCs, and kids leave camp with a friend, and their parents are crying because it is the first time they've ever had a friend. So what it is it's getting them around the right kid that they can make the connection with, but keeping in mind it doesn't take 10, it takes 1. And once they get 1 win, it really helps. Well, Mary can talk about it. I'm not trying to sell my camp. It's not the purpose of that. The purpose is to get them around the right people. And if they have that chance with the right kid, it's also not being around a group of kids, because I teach my kids behave differently in a group of kids than they'll behave by themselves. Have you all seen this? Sometimes, a kid will change because the group influences them, and that kid alone can be a nice kid. So a play date, one nice kid without a group of kids can be a real win. Last thing I'll tell you is get them involved in the sport. That's an individual sport. Is he athletic at all? Like totally non-athletic?
He's tried, and that's another failure point.
Okay.
I'm never gonna do it.
Because kids are, I try to get them in like cross country or swimming or something that you're like your own person in, not a team sport. Or then find something else where they're good, where they're in a play and they're doing scenery or something like that. So there are the right kids, you just have to find the right group. Yeah.
I was just gonna add, like, hopefully with one successful interaction, they can start like breaking down that wall and that feeling of always, them thinking that they're always a failure. So all it takes is one successful.
With the 9-year-old too, I would call the school, talk to the teacher and see if the teacher has a suggestion of a kid, and then do the mom thing and set it up, keep it short, like 2 hours. Structure it so it's a win. Don't let it go on too long so it falls apart.
Yeah.
But a lot of times the school will suggest, be like, I can't tell you, but, and they'll give you a kid who'd be a good match for your kid.
If you have any other questions and they were not answered, please feel free to email us. We'll make sure all questions get answered. And just a reminder that we will be sending out the presentation to everyone and all of the slides tomorrow. And we'll ask that you complete the survey at that time as well.
Thank you for being here.
Thanks.